Welcome to another video by Flat Earth Trads. Please subscribe, like and share it.
The essential is the cry for liberty, the breaking away from God's system. I will not serve is the cry of Lucifer, and freedom of conscience is the cry of Luther. Liberty, equality, fraternity is the cry of the French Revolution. And the communists want to be free from human nature. The communists dream of changing human nature. And the modern man generally, you know, anything you tell him he can't do or that he's limited to, he immediately wants to do it. It's just, you know. They can't bear being in any way imprisoned. And of course this is the ultimate liberation, because this is the liberation from the object. My thinking is liberated from having to, when I see white in front of me, I'm liberated from having to think that that's white. I can think it's purple or green if I like it. And that's the way modern people are. They seriously think that to deny that 2 and 2 is 4 is a liberation. To be able to think that 2 and 2 is 5 or 2 and 2 is 3, that's not craziness, that's liberty. That's what they think. All right, well, let's take a look at the... we saw yesterday the Catholic Apologists. We come to 38, Neophilia, the Reformer in general, and the principle in 38 is that everything Catholic has got to be changed and renewed. For instance, the Hail Mary and the Lord's Prayer have got to be changed. The way of the cross has got to be changed. You may remember that about a year or 2 years ago, the Pope actually pretended to change the way of the cross. I don't know if many churches, they threw out all the stations which are not in the Bible. And so it finished up much less than 14 stations. It finished up, I forget how many stations, but every station that wasn't in the Bible they threw out. I don't know how many churches have started yanking down the stations out of the 14, but the real up-to-date modernists will have stripped it back to something like 8 stations. 8 or 9 stations. They wanted to change the Ave Maria. Sorry, you...
I saw one camps too, they'd taken everything down but the numbers.
Yes.
They just had the wrong numerals.
They still have 14 numbers? Well, they still have the numbers. Maybe they're going to change the numbers next.
No picture, please.
Yeah, sure.
How does they want to change Ave Maria?
They want to change our Father, so not to get the term personal.
Our parent person.
Yeah, parent person.
Who art in heaven,
They
hallowed.
were saying that somewhere.
That's it. Yes, that's the kind of thing. Neophilia means love of the new. And so nothing traditional can be continued. But why? Because everything traditional is fossilized, it's fixed, it's unchanging, therefore it isn't, buzzword anybody? Alive. It's got to be changing in order to show that it's alive. And that's why a novel sort of priest has to put on a different circus performance every Sunday. He has to imagine being a priest and having to think of some new gimmick every Sunday. That's what that's the position they've reached. It's insane, completely insane. Whereas a Catholic, he doesn't want Father so-and-so on the altar. What he wants is the priest who's standing in for Jesus Christ. And that's why in the classical church, every priest is exactly the same on the altar, or he ought to be. The way his hands move, where he moves, how he speaks, it ought to be so much the same that you don't think of Father Joe on the altar. All you're thinking of is our Lord Jesus Christ. The priest has got to phase himself out on the altar. It's absolutely not his originality and his personality and his this, that, and the other. He's simply standing in for our Lord Jesus Christ. He's acting the person of Christ. And therefore the less of him that there is, the better. But on the new system, it's absolutely, Father Joe has got to put over Father Joe's wonderful personality. And if he doesn't, it isn't living. And if it isn't living, then it's no good. Conclusion, 39. Modernism, this thing, is the synthesis of all heresies. It's a famous conclusion. Another famous paragraph, 39. Modernism is a closely connected system. It pretends, Pius X pointed out much earlier on, it pretends to be disjointed. The modernists pretend that they haven't got a system, that it doesn't all hang together, that they pretend that they're just sort of grasping a truth here and they're not working things out after all. It's a truth here and a truth there. But in fact, says Pius, their system hangs together. It's completely coherent. It synthesizes all heresies and it ruins all religion. It's agnosticism of the intellect. That's this. My mind cannot know reality. All that it knows is the phenomena. The agnosticism of the intellect enslaves man to his religious senses. Since the intellect is discredited, very, very important, since the intellect is discredited, then man becomes a victim of his senses. The senses take over. And that's why modern man is so sentimental. That's why the sound of music and all of this slush out of Hollywood, for instance, because the mind has been discredited. And that again goes back to Protestantism. You set up Protestantism alongside Catholicism, and then a generation later you say, hey, how do I know which is the truth? I don't know what's the truth. My mind cannot know the truth. In that case, boys, off down to the pub and let's enjoy ourselves. Because my mind can't know the truth. Or let's build aeroplanes where we can know the truth. Things material. Those things we know. So let's concentrate on things material. Hence, when you discredit ideas, when you start Protestantism, when you discredit ideas by setting up Protestantism opposite Catholicism, and then others as well, preferably, as far as this system goes, when you set up a whole lot of religions so that you don't know which is true, you discredit the mind, you discredit ideas, you discredit the intelligence. In that case, all that's left is the senses. And so you're going to go, all that's left is the senses and matter, and so you plunge into materialism and sensualism. It's logical. That's the state of modern man, materialism and sensualism, because the mind is discredited, because the truth has been blurred ever since the rise of Protestantism. So that's what the Pope is saying. The intellect being told that it doesn't know enslaves a man to his senses. Even if it's a religious sense, he still becomes a slave of his senses. And hence these Catholics that lose the faith, they fall into charismatics and, the kiss of peace at the end of Mass, and even before the end of Mass. I mean, they just go into sensuality. It's logical. What else? A man enslaves a man to his senses. Its symbolism and immanentism leads to pantheism and atheism. There are 4 isms in a row. The fact that it makes religion just symbolic, the fact that it situates all religion inside, lead directly to seeing God everywhere, pantheism, and then seeing him nowhere, atheism. That's a very, very brief summary of a pretty dense paragraph of Pius X. But the interesting thing is that modernism is the synthesis of all heresies. In other words, all heresies collect together in modernism. Can anyone say why? All heresies, absolutely all heresies ever, collect together in modernism.
Because each person is the author of his own.
Yes.
Objective. God is coming from within. So,
yes.
So it's the synthesis of everybody doing that.
Yes. Any imaginable error and then some is approved of by modernism, since religion comes from inside. Another explanation. That's it. It's on track. What were you going to say?
It seems to me that it seems to be part and parcel of all the rest of together.
Why?
All the other heresies seem to be this way.
Why?
Because the mind, it all comes from within, so you make whatever you want.
Yeah. Every heresy is a denial of truth, right? Or a denial of reality. What does this heresy do? What does this system do? This philosophical system do?
It denies divine revelation.
It denies a lot more than divine revelation.
That's all truth.
It denies all truth and all. It unhooks the mind from all reality. If then any one heresy is an unhooking from reality, this system unhooks from all reality. Selectively, of course. The system allows me to admit that the black liquid on the breakfast table is coffee. I could go thirsty if I didn't admit that. So it's but selectively, On this system, I can deny any reality that I like. And that's why all denials of reality are included implicitly in modernism. In other words, corruption of the mind cannot go deeper than this system. This is as deep as you can go, because the corruption is attacking the mind. When you attack man's senses by, say, getting him into pornography, for instance, you're attacking his senses. That's terrible. Terrible. Because it's pornography, and those things, they enslave a man, and it's difficult to get out, and so on and so on and so on. That's bad enough. But you're still only attacking his senses. His mind is still capable of knowing that this is wrong, even if he does it. But when you attack his mind, there's nothing higher.
Oh, the system kills conscience?
It corrupts conscience, yes. It corrupts conscience. It corrupts everything. It twists conscience. I can do anything I like with my conscience. Because I'm unhooked from reality. It's the synthesis of all heresies. It's the...
So if someone gets deeply in the system, and let's say will kill anyone, his conscience will be unable to stop him. He'll be unable to know he's wrong.
Well, you bring in another point there. Of course, this is a question in St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa. Can the principles of right and wrong be destroyed in a person's mind? Can the natural law be wiped out of a person's mind? And St. Thomas's answer is that all but the most basic principles of the natural law can be wiped out. All but the most basic principles of the natural law. In other words, you can, let's forget about this. For instance, the Spartan boys were taught to steal. They were taught it was a good thing for their country to steal. Then another example he gives is, I forget another example he gives, but you can wipe out quite a lot of the natural law, but the very most basic things, the difference between right and wrong, and the basic principles, those you can't wipe out. Therefore, since killing is so basic, I don't know whether somebody could really drown his conscience if he killed. If he killed unjustly, his conscience would... That question is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Do you know Crime and Punishment of Dostoevsky? You should read it. Dostoevsky is a very modern writer. He's in the 19th century in Russia. He's a very modern writer. And if you have a crazy and sick young 20th century adolescent who's got a bit of intelligence, make him read Dostoevsky. Because Dostoevsky is the modern chaos with nevertheless the solution, a religious solution. Dostoevsky is not Catholic, but he was Orthodox, and he definitely was believing. And the story of Crime and Punishment is this young man, Raskolnikov, who wants to be like Napoleon. And in order to be like Napoleon, he's going to liberate himself from the moral law. And in order to demonstrate that he is free of the moral law, which is exactly the 20th century problem, in order to demonstrate that he is free of the moral law, he is going to commit a gratuitous murder. And so he kills a little old lady who, in order to grab her purse, which contains a few kopecks, nothing. He kills in order to demonstrate that he's free of the moral law. And then the rest of the book is how his conscience slowly catches up on him. The police get on his tail, and there's a very smart police officer, and he and the police officer play cat and mouse in interrogations. And then also he meets a young woman of the streets called Sonia. This is Dostoevsky. It's horrible, it's vile, it's ugly, but Dostoevsky faces up to the full chaos of the modern world. Because Russia in the 19th century was caught without having... Russia was hit by liberalism in the 19th century in a way that Europe, whereas West Europe had been building up for it and so was inoculated to some extent. The full blast of liberalism hit religious Russia in the 19th century. And Dostoevsky is trying to handle this liberal chaos. And so the full force of the chaos hits him. And he presents Raskolnikov then trying to liberate himself from the law. And he can't do it because there's a conscience there. And then he meets this young woman of the streets. And the central scene of the book is when the young woman who's with him on the fourth floor of some wretched tenement building, she makes him read the 11th chapter of the Gospel of St. John, which is the rising of Lazarus. And this crazy young man who's been trying to liberate himself from the moral law reads the 11th chapter. Now, as he reads the Gospel of John, light begins to break in, thanks to this woman of the streets. I mean, the truth of the gospel coming through a woman of the streets, that's, St. Petersburg in the 19th century. I think there's something autobiographical in it. I think something similar probably happened. I'm not an expert on Dostoevsky, but something probably happened in his own life. But from then onwards, he's on the way up instead of on the way down. From then onwards, he realizes that he's done wrong. He begins to realize he's done wrong. And finally, he realizes that he's going to have to pay for his crime. And he goes off to Siberia with a young woman, I think. And that's the end of the story. But in other words, and it's like Shakespeare. Shakespeare studied this problem in Macbeth. Both Lady Macbeth and Macbeth tried to break out of the moral law. Lady Macbeth says, towards the beginning of the play, "Come, you unmortal spirits, unsex me here, and fill me from top to toe full of the direst cruelty." She says, "Take my milk, you murdering ministers, and turn it to gall." She is the first feminist. The full horror of feminism is already there in Macbeth. And she is asking to be unsexed. She wants mother's milk, which is the most tender and nourishing and life-giving thing in a woman. She wants that to be turned to poison in order that she motivate Macbeth to commit the murder which will make him king and she queen. Or no, her queen. So you've already got it in Shakespeare. Just read Macbeth. And Shakespeare's answer then is that by the 5th act, Lady Macbeth then has bottled it. She's screwed herself down and bottled herself up, and she's unsexed herself, and she's called upon the devils to take over, and she pushes Macbeth to commit the murder, and she keeps on motivating him, and then he gets motivated on his own, and he doesn't need her to push him any longer. He goes on. He gets into murder, and he advances murder. But by the 5th act, she has bottled all this up. But the famous sleepwalking scene, it comes out in her sleep. She out damned spot, and she's sleepwalking. The famous scene in the 5th act where she's sleeping. What will not all the seas incarnate won't all the perfumes of Arabia, won't all the waters of all the oceans wash out this blood? She's sleepwalking out damned spot. Her conscience is even in her sleep. It won't come out during her waking hours. It has to come out in her sleep. And then as for Macbeth, Macbeth also tries to screw himself down, and then he wades her in blood, and he goes from murder to murder, and each murder becomes more easy, which is exactly what Ted Bundy says on this tape, which is well worth getting hold of. Each murder becomes more easy. Each mortal sin becomes more easy as you get into the habit. The first mortal sin is the most difficult, but then it gets easier and easier. But Macbeth also, at the end, realizes it's futile. Out, brief candle, life's but a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. Out, brief candle. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. And Macbeth also, life has turned to dust. And then he just fights it out and gets killed in the final fight. So Shakespeare says there is a moral order which cannot be destroyed. And it can't be destroyed in men's consciences. And the Catholic answer to this is that even though this mental corruption is tremendous, nevertheless, the voice of God still speaks inside one of these people. And their conscience the voice of God is still speaking. And that's where these modernists, you can be as nice to them as you like. You can explain and explain and explain them, and sort of justify their delinquency but on the bottom line, they've got to be knowing what they're doing, because God is speaking to them. St. Philip Neri said that grace is like a silk thread. The grace of God is like a silk thread. It's very, very light and very, very delicate. It's like a silk thread that falls on your shoulder. And you look at that, what's that? You brush it off. It hardly touches you, just brush it off. Or you look at what's that? Oh, it's quite pretty. Oh. You pull on it, in comes a little string. You pull on the string, in comes a tiny little chain. You pull on a little chain, in comes a little rope. You pull on a little rope, you get a bigger chain. You pull on a little chain. Finally, you can tie yourself to God by great bonds, if you like. But you have to take that grace and go on pulling on that grace. In other words, what is absolutely certain is that these terrible modernists, although this system is tremendously efficacious for drowning their conscience, nevertheless their conscience is still speaking. And Lenin, until the day he died, will have been receiving graces. For instance, Lenin, a little while before he died, was visited by an old friend who was a priest. This old friend disguised himself. He didn't appear as a priest, but he went and visited Lenin, and he talked to Lenin. And Lenin, in a moment of truth, said, if only we'd had 10 St. Francis, we wouldn't have had to have a revolution in Russia. So he said that so Lenin was still thinking of that religious dimension. Lenin said, God is my personal enemy. He said crazy and blasphemous things like that. But the voice of God was still speaking in him. And in these modernists and heretics, the voice of God is still speaking until the moment they die. And God is still appealing. Is that the answer to your question? Conscience cannot be drowned in these people, and it is still speaking. But this is one of the most efficient systems of all for handcuffing your conscience, because it pretends to unhook you from reality. But somebody operating this system and living selectively by it, because you can, in order to live, you have to live selectively. You couldn't live with this full time. You've got to turn it on and off in order to be able to survive. Somebody using this system selectively has got at some point to be aware that he is cheating.
So how can I know where to switch on off? When I am in system, how can I know where to switch off?
That's where the system can spin out of control and where a person can go mad. This system can get hold of people and then make them go crazy. But most people, a simple survival instinct tells them, this is coffee, well, I better believe what I know when I see this. The basics for survival. And of course, the advantage of this system, what do the churchmen get out of this system? Anybody? What advantage does this system have for the churchmen? I mean, what do they gain by it? Yes. Freedom, yes, and?
They are aware of any duties.
Yes, and they gain the approval
Of
the world. They get the approval of the world by this system. They get the applause of everybody. Everybody applauds these recent liberal folks. They're popular with everybody.
Excellency, how should we anticipate these people dealing with us in the years ahead? What should we expect?
That's a very good question. How should we anticipate these people dealing with us in the years to come? They are going to hate us more and more. They are going to blame us more and more. As I was saying, the Clintonites, when their economic system breaks down, they're blaming Reagan. Because, you see, the libertarian believes that liberty is the solution of all problems. And therefore, his problem is anything that blocks his liberty. Anything that still blocks his liberty. Anything that remotely still blocks his liberty. Now, we are blocking the liberty of the modernist church. Without us, the modernists would be much free to go even much more chaotic. Therefore, when things go badly in the modernist church, they're going to blame us, and they are already blaming us. Paul VI said before he died, the great grief of my pontificate is the Lefebvre movement, or the traditional movement. Exactly. Well, thank goodness we were the grief of his. But you see, for him, everything was wonderful in the Paul VI world. Everything was wonderful except this this movement, which was telling him that he was wrong. And it was telling his conscience that his whole dream was wrong. Therefore, all his hatred and anger centered on this movement. And that's what's liable to happen in the years in the next few years. They're going to blame us. And they're going to come and get us.
Don't pretend that the society of fathers are a bunch of nice little boys who are just reading books, getting educated, and everything. You're missing the point. We're here to stay. We're here to go going home. We've all had breakthroughs. They're going to have to take us out. It's going to be difficult. Because we have, number one, grace, intelligence.
Yeah.
We have people. We have big bucks coming our way. And we have a lot of things that a lot of them don't have. And we have a unity. See? And we have people all over the world. So we're not just, a little subsidized government agency.
It's true that, one with God is a majority. If the society is faithful, or whoever is faithful, has got God on his side, and we're going to win in the end. There's no question about that. But between now and the chastisement, we're not going to be popular with these people.
Well, that's the whole purpose, to say you're so you're going to be popular.
Yeah, absolutely. I must just think we should be popular, very far from it. But they're not going to love us. So is that the answer to your question? And I think they're going to, they have to persecute us. At the moment, they're doing it with the media and with general disapproval, but at a given point, the liberal state and the liberal church, they talk about separation of church and state. But when it comes to the liberal state and the liberal church, they're going to get back together again in order to crush the few people that are raining on their parade. And that's the traditional Catholics. Because we are the ones that are standing up and telling them all that they're wrong, and they don't like being told that they're wrong. If we weren't there, they could believe, like Paul VI, they believe that their whole wonderful dream is marvelous. But remember what God says in the Gospel. If our Lord, the Pharisees tell our Lord to shut up the little children. Our Lord says, if these shut up, the very stones of the street would cry out. In other words, the truth of God cannot be silenced. And if they succeeded in silencing us, which they will want to do, but if they succeeded in doing it, the truth would break out somewhere else. And if there were no people left, our Lord himself says the stones of the street would stand up and cry the truth. The truth of God has to be heard. There's no way God can allow the truth to be silenced. And therefore, they're trying to silence us. They would love to silence us. They will do all they can to silence us, but they won't be silenced. Whether we or not are faithful, whether we stay in the game, we're going to do our darndest to stay in the game. And if we get martyred, that's all part of the contract.
We're not looking forward to that either.
No, correct. Well, correct. Not one little bit. Nevertheless, it goes with the territory.
Oh, wow.
In Germany already,
So,
guys, as a minister,
You know,
no Catholics.
here in the United States, have you heard of FinCEN? Or the MBTA, that agency which went into Waco? The government is the federal government is preparing, it has the troops, it has these black dressed, with sort of ski caps, with the guns. They're going like Ninja Turtles, right? In order to shoot up and destroy anybody who's got faith and guns. Right? That's why one reason why it might not be advisable, whatever Reuben thinks, to have guns here, for instance. Because at the moment, as long as we don't have guns, they won't be afraid of us. But the moment you've got a combination of faith or conviction and guns, that's very dangerous. And so they went in and blasted them out in order to send a message to everybody else. And that's what the story of Waco. And they've got already prepared and built in the United States, I've heard the figure of 43 big detention centers, which call them concentration camps. I said they were in the Dakotas. I'm not sure, in fact, they are in the Dakotas, but your father said there was one in the Dakotas. He spoke about them in the Dakotas. I don't know. But they're built. There's a huge one in Alaska, in the middle of Alaska. And they're all over. And the federal government is preparing to lock up and shut away the citizens with faith and or with guns, who will stand up to them? Because the price, as their attitude is, in order to make an omelette, you've got to break eggs. In order to build a new world order, we're going to have to stamp on and suppress and get out of the way anybody who really stands up to us. And therefore, any substantial resistance, they've got detention centers for. And so, we may well be meeting in 5-10 years' time in a detention center.
That's what they said.
Can we put up a machine gun up in the tower, Your Excellency?
Sorry?
Can we put up some machine guns up in the tower? I want a man.
There's your man, Reuben.
Listen, you can do more damage to these people with 4 beautiful women than with a machine gun. What's the matter?
That's what they suggested with those Air Force base closings, is to start up prisons or camps with those.
So that's surely the way it's going. Waco is a sign of the times. And the poor characters of Waco, I mean, I'm not in favor of David Koresh, obviously the man is a heretic and so on. But
I think he saved his soul, though.
That
died for a good cause, that guy. The last book has not been read on yet.
God knows. I don't know. I wouldn't claim to say. But in any case,
I offer a little prayer here and there for the guy, but not for the others.
But logically, that's the way it has to go. It was logical. They had to say that we were excommunicated. They have got to go to the end of their line. The end of their line is imprisoning us or martyring us. They won't win, but they have to go that way. Right? Yes.
So going back to Paul VI in the condemnation or the Archbishop
Yes.
and everything in that aspect, what was meant by his statement then, or was it a contradiction in his own belief when he said the smoke of Satan had entered the church? What did he mean by that?
See, that's
In his words.
Yes.
How did he mean that?
Well, that I think you have to say that's a moment of truth.
So he realized that at the same time, and at the same
You see,
time,
this you can't survive. You can't live by this system. If you really live by this system, when a cup of coffee was on the table, you would suspect that it might be a crocodile, and you couldn't touch it, or it might be a snake, or it might be poison. You'd sniff it, you'd take just a sip of it, and you'd still say, well, my senses tell me it isn't poison, but I can't be sure it isn't poison. Because I only know the phenomena. I don't know what's behind it. Therefore, you would be unable to drink the coffee, you'd be unable to drink or eat, you couldn't survive. Therefore, this system depends upon being selected. Therefore, reality is always there. You are revolting against reality and liberating yourself from reality by pretending that you believe in all of this. And you kid yourselves that you do believe in it, and you act as though you believe in it, and you revolutionize the church because you believe in it. Nevertheless, reality is always back there. And I personally think that popes like, it's very difficult. Only God knows what goes on, what really goes on inside these people. Only God can judge what goes on inside these people. But personally, I think, to take an example, I think that in their twisted way, Pope Paul VI and John Paul II in different ways, but I think the two of them think that they're serving the church. We're getting into very difficult territory as far as I'm concerned.
it seems, with that statement like that, it seems as like you said, they know this is the dream of the new church.
Yes.
But at the same time, they see the catastrophe of it.
Yes.
Right? At the same time.
Yes, that's right. That's it. You see, a few months before he died, Pope Paul VI wept. Apparently he once wept because of the lack of vocations. Now, if he was, and he's in contradiction. Now, what the Archbishop said about it, he's a liberal Catholic, and a liberal Catholic is a walking contradiction. And so they have these contradictory impulses, and they're contradictory moments. One moment they are registering reality, and they react to reality. The next moment they're advancing in their dream, and they're pushing their dream. What I said here, Cicinello is a little tougher on. I was a little more gentle on Paul VI, but I'm not pretending I'm wrong. I just don't know. Who knows? Only God knows can judge what really goes on with these characters, because they're in a dreamland. Cicinello mentions that any of these. It mentions that de Lubac before he died, recognized that something had gone wrong. It mentions that von Balthasar didn't like Karl Rahner. In other words, even these liberals have their moments of truth.
Yeah.
And Paul VI, before he died, also, the CCNR article says, Paul VI also, by the time Paul VI died in 1978, here we are. As Pope from 1963, Montini opened the doors much wider still to the new theologians, receiving them in audience, concelebrating with them, praising them. Many bishops of the Second Vatican Council, ignorant of their theology, but knowing that the new theology had been condemned, only supported it because of the lead given by Paul VI. In giving this lead towards the dream, towards the brave new world, towards the revolutionizing of the church, Paul VI proceeded carefully, with a carefulness that gave some observers the impression that he was hesitant or indecisive, like Hamlet in Shakespeare's play. Maybe involuntarily he had moments when his conscience, or what was still Catholic in him, rose up in anguish at his wrenching the church off her true path. But voluntarily or with his will, he was resolute in changing the church's direction, and any carefulness that he displayed in doing so was, in fact, to avoid provoking undesirable reactions on the part of the conservatives, as Monsignor Bonini testifies in his book on that reform of the liturgy which the two of them brought about together. With his will, Pope Paul VI knew exactly where he was going, and he was resolute in going there. In other words, it's like Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth is resolute. She screws herself up to the... Macbeth has this speech also. Is this a dagger that I see before me? It's handled toward my hand. And then he screws up his courage in order to commit this crime. He wants to commit the crime. He resolves to commit the crime. And yet there's still something in him protesting. And so Paul VI wanted to revolutionize the church because the devil had possession of his intelligence. But there's something was still Catholic in him protesting against it. Something still Catholic capable of recognizing that there were ruins and that the church was demolishing itself. And then in a moment of truth, he said it. And then those moments of truth, of course, the traditionalists all seize upon. The smoke of Satan has entered the church. The church is in the process of destroying itself. Those moments of truth, but they aren't typical. And then the moment that 2 days later, Pope Paul VI is back on track of wrenching the church, off course. The liberal Catholic is a walking contradiction. They're very complicated people. Paul VI was a very complicated person because he's a classic example. I said at the beginning, the scheme of history as liberalism sees it and history as Catholicism sees it. And I said that, very few people are purely liberal or purely Catholic. Most people are a mixture, and all of the confusion of the modern world is usually a mixture of the two systems. And Paul VI is a classic example of the two systems mixing. And there were moments of Catholicism in him, but most of it was liberalism. And so the two are in contradiction. I once asked the Archbishop whether Paul VI was a Mason. He said he didn't have to be. The Archbishop didn't think he was a Mason. Malachi Martin thinks Montini may once have been a Mason. Malachi Martin thinks that there was back in the 19th century, there was an agreement between when the church lost all its territory in the 1870. The church was without means, and he says that the church came to an agreement with the Masons, and the Masons said, well, we'll look after your material needs just so long as you let us have 2 men on, particular some financial council or something like that. We need 2 Masons, 2 churchmen who are Masons. Now, they can very well, once they stop serving us, they can step back out of Masonry and go back to being churchmen in order to continue their career. But we need 2 Masons. And maybe Paul was one of those Masons.
Well, this isn't one in that big book from Malachi Martin. What's the name? I read when it isn't, and it comes out he was a Mason,
Well,
but it is at
Vatican?
Yes, and
Maybe.
And the
Who
other
knows?
and lastly, pleaded.
Because of this blood.
Well, at the end, he says, was John the 23rd a Mason? He says, was he? But it wasn't.
It's all, we're in a very grey area. We really don't know. But we must, at 11 o'clock, we'll see briefly the causes and remedies of modernism, which are really not all that complicated. And then we may look at a few examples.
We hope that you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share.